Hi there, and welcome to The Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And today we're going to make an herb and pesto stuffed pork tenderloin. This recipe is so simple and so delicious. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is start to make the breading. So we're going to actually bread this. But because I'm eating low carb, I'm going to do sort of a keto breading. You could switch this up and use breadcrumbs, and I will go over that in just a few minutes, and it will also be in my written post. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and use 2 cups or 2 ounces of pork rinds, okay? These are just pork rinds you get at the store, and I'm gonna process them in my Ninja Foodi cold and hot blender to create a breading. And it's gonna be, we're gonna put some herbs in there too. It's really, really delicious. Now, the one thing I will say is that you don't have to have the blender to do this. You definitely can use a food processor. That would be no problem. You don't even need to have the Ninja Foodi to do this. You could do this in the Ninja Foodi grill. You could do it in your regular oven. You could do it in the Ninja Foodi oven, whatever you have, because we're gonna go on the bake setting for this. So you can make this recipe with whatever type of appliances you have. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add in 1 cup of pistachios. These are shelled pistachios. Now, this is my preference for the pesto. I love the flavor. I think you will too. But if you're not a fan of pistachios, you can switch it out for a different type of nut. Pine nuts are really traditional in pesto, but I just really love the pistachio flavor. Goes perfectly with the pork. All right, so we're gonna put in 1 cup there. And the 2 cups of pork rinds. And we're gonna put in about a tablespoon of fresh rosemary. If you did not have fresh rosemary, no worries, you can use dried. You would wanna use 1 teaspoon of dried. That's kind of the rule of thumb. If you're using fresh herbs, you use 3 times as much as you would dry. So 1 teaspoon of dried rosemary or 1 tablespoon of fresh. I don't really measure, I just sort of guesstimate on that. We're gonna put in, and that is some sticky rosemary, which means it is really, really going to be very pungent. So that's good. All right, I'm gonna use 2 green onions. We use a total of 4 green onions, and I'm just gonna use 2 here. I really don't have to chop these up, but it's sort of like a habit of mine. Oops, and I just dropped a little bit on the floor. No worries about that. I've got an extra one in here. So let me grab that right there and just, all right, put that in. And then you want to put in 3 fresh basil leaves. If you didn't have fresh basil and you wanted to use dried basil, just put in maybe 1/4 teaspoon. That would be fine. So I'm going to pick off 3 of these leaves here. And just sort of roughly chop them, put them in there. Just roughly pull them apart, that's fine. All right, so now we're gonna go and make our breading. And this also becomes part of the pesto. Okay, so we're only gonna take out about 3/4 to a cup of this at the end. The rest of it stays in the blender, and then we put the rest of the ingredients in and make the pesto filling for our stuffed pork tenderloin. All right, so I'm gonna turn this on. And I'm just gonna pulse it. And just go in here and just make sure that everything looks good. So that's all it takes, just a few little pulses and we're good to go. Actually, you know what, I'm gonna go another pulse. I see some bigger pieces of the herbs. I wanna get those blended up a little bit better, or chopped up a little bit better. So let's just do another. All right, that looks good. Because there is a lot of fat in pork rinds, obviously, they tend to kind of go to the sides a little bit more than like breadcrumbs would. If you wanted to use breadcrumbs, you don't even have to add the breadcrumbs into your blender or your food processor. You could simply put in the herbs and the pistachios, crush those up really finely, and then mix them in with your breadcrumbs. And you would probably want about maybe 1/2 of a cup of breadcrumbs. I haven't done the recipe that way, but I know it would work perfectly. So feel free to switch that up if you want. And then we're gonna go ahead and take some of this out for our breading. looks good. So about 3/4 of a cup. Now what I like to do if I'm using the blender is kind of go down into the bottom here where the blades are and loosen any of the pistachios and the other mix that has kind of gotten packed down in there so that it's a little bit looser when we go to make the pesto. All right, so to this mixture, this is the breading for the outside of the pork after we stuff it. We're gonna add in about 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese, or you could use Asiago or any hard cheese that you want. We use 1 ounce in the total recipe. You wanna use a fine grater, okay? Because it will make you about 1 cup. If you use 1 ounce of cheese, it will grate up to be 1 cup because it's very, very fine. So just about, 1/4 cup is fine. No need to measure either. It's perfectly okay. And then we add just a tad bit of salt. So 1/4 teaspoon of salt will do just fine. Remember, we've got the pistachios. They're roasted and salted, so they have salt. We also have the cheese, and that has salt, so we don't need to over-salt this. And just mix that up, and then we'll set that aside for when we're ready to bread up our pork. Smells so good already. All right, set that aside. Okay, now for the pesto. If you didn't want to bother with making pesto, you don't have to. You could use the jarred pesto. You would use probably about 1/4 cup maybe of the prepared pesto, and you would add in the herbs and the spinach. Okay, that's going to give us good volume so that we can really stuff this pork tenderloin. So I'm going to use about 1 cup of basil. Loosely packed is fine. And I'm, again, not really measuring, just kind of eyeballing here. I love the smell of basil. Yummy, yummy. All right, we've got some thyme and we've got some more rosemary that we're going to put in there. And we've got our green onions. It's not quite 1 cup. Just keep. All right, that looks good. Now, for the rosemary, I do take it off of the stem. So I just take my fingers and just go right down. You don't need to chop it up or anything like that. So 1 sprig of fresh rosemary, and that's about 1.5 tablespoons. So you would want to probably use about 1 teaspoon and maybe a little extra. If you were 1.5 teaspoons, probably be fine if you wanted to use dried herbs. And then same thing for the thyme. I'm just kind of stripping it off. You can use 1 to 2 sprigs of thyme, and then 2 green onions. Gonna add all this to the blender or your food processor, either one's fine. And then we're gonna add in 3 cups of loosely packed spinach. Another 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then the rest of that Parmesan cheese. And I do freshly grate it. I don't recommend buying the pre-grated hard cheeses. They grate up so much nicer and they taste so much better when you grate them fresh. All right, so that's that. Now, we are gonna add some olive oil, obviously, but first I'm gonna do a couple of pulses just to see if I can get this mixture starting to break down a little bit before I stream in some olive oil. So let me find my lid. I lost it. Okay, there we go. All right, so go ahead and turn the blender on. Let me move these out of the way here so you can see. All right, so let's go ahead and give it a few pulses here. And you see nothing's really happening. And that's just because the breading is in the bottom and I can't really get the spinach to kind of get down there and engage. That's fine, it's no big deal. I just use this and kind of push it down and try to move the breading a little bit around so that those blades can get that spinach and the rest of the herbs chopped up. But again, once we add in the liquid, it helps to emulsify everything, so you don't really need to worry about it. The other thing you can do is dump out all of the dried stuff and put it on top. So the way that you add ingredients to a blender really does make a difference. And so the dry stuff here in this case really should have gone on top, but I didn't want to have to, empty it out and then do it again. So we'll just do this first. All right, so that's not really doing too well. But once we add this in, it's going to be just fine. So we're going to go ahead and stream in about a 1/4 cup. And I'm going to go ahead and do this on the manual blend. So I'm going to hit blend, and I'm going to hit medium. And we're going to stream in. And it's starting to work. Let me just turn that off for a second so you can hear me. So it's starting to work. Now, I don't have my tamper out. That would be a great tool to have during this process if you're using the cold and hot blender. But I have this large spatula thing that goes down into the blender. The only issue with this is it will reach the blades. So you want to make sure that you have the blender off before you start to move this stuff around. If you have the tamper, it won't reach the blades. And I do have the tamper, I just didn't get it out. You can just push it down and that will help to engage. So we've added about 2 tablespoons of the olive oil, and I'm gonna go ahead and go back on the blend on medium. How it starts to work. All right, I'm gonna turn that off again so you can hear me. I wouldn't ordinarily need to turn that off, but I'm going to so you can hear me. And also I'm gonna go ahead and, while it's off, I'm gonna just scrape down the sides a little bit here, just to make sure we get everything in there good. Oh, it looks amazing and it smells amazing. All right, that looks good. All right, perfect. Okay, so that's done. So now we need to prepare our pork. So let me get all this out of the way and we will start butterflying our pork, okay? All right, so let's talk about our pork tenderloin. So this is about a 1 pound, it's actually 1 pound, 2 ounce pork tenderloin. When you buy them in a package in the grocery store, they come 2 to a pack. So just so you know that if you haven't bought them before. They are also going to be long and on the skinny side. So this is different than a pork loin, which is a much bigger piece of meat. So just so you don't get that confused. This would work with a pork loin, but the timing and stuff would be a little bit different. So this is the pork tenderloin. Now what I've already done, and I probably should have done that on camera to show you guys, but I didn't, is I removed some of the silver skin that's on the pork and just kind of trimmed it up a little bit so that I have a nice piece of the pork tenderloin. Now, these little bits aren't gonna matter, so I don't worry about that. Now, we wanna butterfly this. So we wanna cut it, and we also want to pound it out so that we can roll it up before we bread it. So I'm gonna take my knife, and you see how I flipped it over? So I've got this kind of nice side, I call it the nice side, nice pretty side, and then this other side that doesn't look so nice. That's where I make my cuts. And basically, I just sort of go right down the center here. It helps if you have a sharp knife. And just kind of keep moving, and I take my finger, go along this way, and just let it open up. So we're butterflying it. Now you don't want to go all the way down, but you want to get it open as much as you can. So just a little bit more here. And that looks really good. All right, so I feel it here, so I can feel it's about 1/4 of an inch thick right here in the middle, and that's gonna be perfect for rolling. But these edges are too thick. I mean, we wouldn't really be able to roll very easily. So then I'm gonna pound it out with a meat tenderizer. And the meat tenderizer part is actually the pointy side here, but I'm using the flat side because I wanna pound this out. So this is a dual purpose tool. It comes apart, it's very heavy. I mean, it's probably like 2 pounds in and of itself. So it does the job perfectly. All right, real quick though, I'm gonna go ahead and start the Ninja Foodi. I wanna preheat it on broil for 10 minutes with the basket in. I'm gonna wash my hands, start the Ninja Foodi, then we'll get to pounding this meat out. So it's about, between 1/4 and 1/2 of an inch thick. right, that looks really good. So it's nice and thin. It's probably about 1/4 of an inch thin. Now around here, it's not quite as thin. You can even just cut these off if you wanted. I don't usually worry with it though. I just roll them up and let it be what it is. All right, so let's put our pesto here, which this is a good, probably 1.5 to 2 cups of pesto. But you would not want to just use plain pesto. So if you have a jar of pesto, you really need to add that spinach or something else to give the volume and dry it out, because otherwise it would be so oily, it's just going to kind of leak out all over the place. So then I spread this in the center here, and I go about, I don't know, maybe 1/2 of an inch or so from the edge. Just because as we roll it, it's going to push out some. And you might lose some pesto. That's not a big deal though. All right, this looks great. All right, so now let's roll it up, and then we will get it into the breading, and then we will pin it, or you could use toothpicks. And I'll show you the pins that I use, which I find quite handy. And it's funny because I kind of thought they were sort of like I don't know, just like a kitschy kind of jokey thing, but they actually work really well. All right, so you can see as I'm folding, I'm tucking, I pull back, fold again, pull back, fold again. If you go a little bit too much like I did in the center, unfortunately, I ended up having a little bit of an explosion, but we're gonna bread that up anyway, so I'm not gonna worry about it. Now, if you wanted this to look absolutely perfect or fit in the Ninja Foodi, you could certainly cut it in half if you wanted, but I'm not going to worry about doing that either. I'm just going to get it into my breading. So let me move this here a little bit, pull this up, and then get it into the breading. And you don't need to put a wash or anything like that, any kind of egg wash or anything like that. There's enough moisture in the meat to have the breading stick. And we just roll it around. Because this piece is a little bit bigger than my tray, I'm going to take it out and finish up here. So just press this mixture into the pork, get it to stay there really nicely. All right, that looks good. Now let's find that seam, which is right here. We're going to end up putting the seam side down. That's going to help sear it all together. But in the meantime, as soon as I get the rest of this on here, oh, this looks and smells so good. So I'm going to use these little pins. And they are like little tacks, basically, but they are designed for meat, for when you're grilling, or like we are going to do bake. And you just stick them in the meat, and then they will keep it together. The guys at Grill Grate sent me these. So they have some great products. They have this Sear and Sizzle Grill Grate for the Ninja Foodi that I absolutely adore. Let's see, where do we have another weak spot here? So I'm going to go ahead and pin it right there. That's going to help to keep that in. All right, let me run and wash my hands so I'm not like getting my Foodi all messed up. We've preheated on broil for 10 minutes, a full 10 minutes with the basket in. Now we are going to bake at 400 for 20 to 25 minutes, okay? All right, so we're going to go ahead and give the basket a quick little spritz here. And then I carefully turn this over and get it into the basket. And I just sort of make it fit, that's all. Perfection. I'm going to give another little spritz here on the outside. Close it up, and we are going to select the bake roast function. We want to take it up to 400 degrees, hit the start button, and then take this up to 25. Now usually I check it at about 20 minutes, and it has been done at 20 minutes, but we're going to do a temperature of this to make sure that we cook it perfectly and get all the pork done. But remember, it's rolled out thin, so it's not going to take as long as it might if it was a full pork tenderloin in the oven. All right, so it's been just about 20 minutes. We're on the bake function at 400, and let's give it a check and let's see. And I didn't flip it or anything like that. I just left it alone. So let's give it a check and let's take a temperature and see where we are. Now, it's really hard when you have any kind of a rolled meat to really get an accurate temperature on the meat itself because it's not solid all the way through. So I'll tell you a little trick that I do is I look at it, number one, try to see where it's rolled, and I take a little temperature right there, and it's reading like 180 right on the edge. So that's totally done for pork. That's a little overdone actually. Let's look right here though. And it's reading about 140 and it's rising up, but I don't know if it's exactly in the pesto part or in the meat. But what I look for when I lift out the thermometer is, do I get a bunch of red juices come out? And if I don't, which I'm not getting, they look nice and clear, then I feel like I'm pretty good to go. I'm gonna let it rest though on the cutting board for about 5 minutes until I cut it. Now the trick is getting it out because we gotta get in there and I don't wanna get all the breading off. So I'm gonna try to use a combination of 2 different tools here. And it might stick. If it sticks a little bit, just kind of loosen it a little bit underneath. So I'm going to do this for kind of balance purposes. So I didn't really want to grab all the good breading off, but that works pretty well. All right, looks pretty good. You see we've got it bent. That wouldn't happen if you did it in the oven. Looks really good though. It smells amazing. You can go ahead and turn this off. So let's let it rest for 5 minutes and then I'll cut it down the center for you guys and we'll take those pins out. Wow, that looks really, really good. Perfect. All right, let it rest. All right, so it's been about 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and cut into it. And I'm gonna cut it right down the middle. That's not ordinarily how I would slice it. I would start slicing from the end, but because I want to see exactly how the center is done for you guys, I'm gonna go ahead and just cut it straight down. And it looks absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. Yum, yum, yum. Let me just turn this around so I can get a good look at it. Make sure it's done all the way. And it looks really good. All right, so between 20 and 25 minutes. I don't think you're gonna dry it out if you go 25 minutes, really, because there's so much moisture in there. And now as I'm looking at this half, I'm gonna put it up to the light. Nope, it's perfect for me, but I like my pork on the slightly pink side. Not raw or anything, but slightly pink. If you want your pork completely cooked, I would take it the 25 minutes. All right, so now let's give it a taste. Oh, it looks so good. I'm excited. All right, let's give a little slice here. Go straight down with that knife. And you know what I didn't do? I didn't take the pins out, and that's what I was getting caught up on, one of the pins. All right, put that right on the plate there. Oh my gosh, it looks so good. A little messy. I didn't do the greatest job of cutting it, but you know what? That's all right. All right, I'll put this over here. Put this over here. And look at that. I'm just gonna put this up there. I know it's dirty, it's okay. All right, here we go. Now, the most important part of any kind of recipe is how it tastes. So let's cut into it. Now, the oil and stuff in the pesto keeps everything really nice and moist. So this should be absolutely delicious. Wow. It is so tender, it's unreal. And it's very flavorful. Now, one thing I forgot to do, which I ordinarily do, is before I bread the pork, so after I stuff it and roll it, I usually season it with salt and pepper, just lightly. I didn't do that this time, and it doesn't really need it, but I think maybe just a touch more of salt and pepper for me would be something that I would like, but it's perfectly fine without it. Whoops. Wow. The other thing that I would say is I wish I had a little more breading when I breaded it. So I might next time take out more of that dry mixture, because that dry mixture is really not that important for the pesto part of it, you know, that the pork rinds and stuff. So I might take out maybe another half of a cup just so I could get this a little bit better coated. I see some bare spots where I think it would have benefited if it was completely coated. But it is really, really delicious, really easy to make, and just a little bit tad fancier than a regular pork tenderloin. Remember, you can stuff it with whatever you want, so get creative, make it delicious, and make it yours.